I've been excited all semester about having our last day here. We have a guest speaker. So let me tell you a little about him. And then we just got back from a lunch with some Marquette folks. Let me tell you a little about him, and then he's got some things he's going to talk about. As you can see, we know a lot about sabermetrics here, right? So he's going to kind of link that to some other topics. But Mr. John Pudner is a 1988 graduate of Marquette. In fact, that's how we met. I have a brother-in-law. My wife has 6 brothers. But one of them was at Marquette at the same time as John was, Andy. He now lives in Atlanta, so they ran into each other there. And he mentioned to John that I'm a big Marquette basketball fan, season ticket holder, so John called me up, and of course he got a copy of his book, which we talked about in class a little bit. So he wrote this book called The Ultimate Hoops Guide, Marquette University. And if you follow Marquette basketball, you likely read Crack Sidewalks, and John's been a contributor to that, particularly analytical kind of perspective, which is what we spend a lot of time with in this class, which is why I wanted to invite him. But all that's really in John's spare time. If spare time exists when you have 9 kids like John does. But after a short journalism career, John spent a decade running political campaigns in which he developed highly efficient grassroots organizations. Despite being drastically outspent in challenging long-term incumbents, he won more than 75% of his races in 10 years. He's then joined the corporate world at Intelidata Technologies. During 3 years in the corporate arena, John saw the potential to combine the best practices from campaigns and business to efficiently bring grassroots process he developed to win public affairs contests. Today, Mr. Pudner works for the firm he founded called Concentric Direct, where he continues to work on the vision of being able to go into any community in the United States and create action from the ground up, which I think he'll talk a lot about that today when I talk about over lunch. So please help me welcome John Pudner back to Marquette, where I think his presentation on using sabermetrics to win will be a perfect conclusion to our class. We spent a lot of time with Moneyball, right? So this will be kind of a perfect way to finish that up. So welcome John back to Marquette.
Thank you for taking the time, and it's great to be back here. I'm sorry to start you with a quote from Moneyball, since I saw from the syllabus it looked like maybe a little time was already spent on it. But if you haven't seen the trailers for the movie yet, they do pull out this quote I put on the front screen, which as soon as my wife saw it said, "That sounds like the thing you tell me all the time. That's not what we're paying for." I know it sounds bad to say we're not paying for airtime, we're buying votes. It sounds a little bad, and but really you're paying for things to happen. And what I want to do here is tie together some of the sabermetrics you've been into and see how it plays out in other arenas such as politics, where it's called micro-targeting, but it's really very similar. There's been a real revolution on stats to where we figure out how much money, how much effort does it take to get something done. Of course, we do get nervous on a college campus if we want to translate this a little and say we're buying wins in sports. That sounds a little bad too. There are NCAA compliance issues that you run up with then, particularly since I happen to also be an Auburn season ticket holder. You can insert your Cam Newton joke here. He's completely innocent. I don't care if I'm in Big Ten, Big East country. Cam is just below Dwayne Wade on a pedestal in my house, so I'm sorry. That's but anyway, but let's just say we recruit wins. We develop wins. When we're out of professional sports, we're not buying. And it's very important, though, to see how this is played out. And I want to start with showing you 2 pictures that should have never happened. And they may seem completely unrelated. First one you'll see here was actually President Bush and his family after winning re-election, which 4 months earlier should not have happened. And I'll explain why, being in politics. The other one is the shot that Hayward, unfortunately Butler's not ours, was putting up at the end of the national championship last year. Now, one aside you may want to notice here, I wish Pitt had seen this picture, because there's a rule when you're playing Butler. If you're up 1 point with 1 second left and the guy has the ball 60 or 80 feet from the basket, you don't foul him. You can see Smith's getting out of his way. If you're going to beat me with a 60-foot shot, beat me. But I do have big East allegiance in basketball, and as you know, Pitt fouled the guy 80 feet away, and he hit the free throws, and they're out of the tournament. But anyway, but these 2 should not have happened. If you look 4 months before each of these photos were taken, there was no real explanation of how these scenarios would play out. Butler had just gone down to my home state and gotten drubbed by UAB, which was their 4th loss in 9 games. I mean, they were going nowhere. I just listed all of the polls 4 months out on Bush's reelection. You had an incumbent president, and I tell you in politics, when the incumbent goes below 50%, you assume it's over. He was below 50% and losing in July. Every single poll that was run, 45, 50. Hey, if you win most of the undecideds, he was only going to lose by 4, okay? And the reason I cite these two completely different images is it's my contention that only the statistical revolution we've seen in the past century made either of these photos, either of these chronology of events possible. And I want to show you how the two work together. Just to give you a couple other notes, Butler again this year was 14-9 at one point. They're again in the national championship. And basically, we're going to go into stats a little bit. Some of the things you need to look for to determine what's a valid stat, what's something you really can rely on. And one thing Butler has proven is you do need statistical significance. I mean, you can't look at stats on 3 games and project how things are going to happen. And what Butler has done over 2 years is once they accumulate enough information on their opponents, they beat them because they figured out all the tendencies. So anyway, that's how they won their last 25 games and last 14 games respectively. But the other interesting tie-in, not to make you even sicker of Moneyball, is the Bush campaign used Moneyball in their re-election. I mean, they adapted it to politics and really changed how that election went. So going on to the next slide, this may scare you on just how long this talk's going to be, but because it starts with 20th century. Don't worry, I've got to be up in Oshkosh at 4:30. I won't keep you here all day. That was a scheduling snafu. But this is all part of an overall statistical revolution. Didn't start with sports, obviously. And on the next slide, I want to go back to really the beginning of when this all happened. It didn't start with sports or politics. It started with the universe. In 1905, when Einstein put up, probably the most famous equation out there, figured out the relationship of energy versus mass, which I can never figure out if he was right, but my 4th-year engineering son assures me has been proven unbelievably accurate. But it was really the first time people went from kind of stats and just adding things up in linear to we can fold everything together and figure out something comprehensive here. And you saw it in Moneyball. We can figure out how many runs a player's worth, not just what their batting average is. We can figure out how many dollars it takes and how many door knocks it takes to move a particular voter into our column. It all kind of started back here with everything. What's the relationship of energy to mass to the speed of light? And so this is really the starting point, which eventually would be followed up 60, 70 years later on other fronts. So we go ahead, you'll be happy to see we skipped 50 or 60 years there, into the 1960s. And political really took their first shot at stats. I don't want to disillusion anyone here. There was a time when college athletics were sports. They weren't a business. That's hard to believe now, but guys really did go out and sign up and have fun, and yeah, there was a little recruiting, but there wasn't the pressure that's on these kids now. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so this first slide, the next slide I'll give you is takes us back to a scene regarding the Nixon-Kennedy election that was recaptured in Mad Men, a series recently. Please don't go home and tell anyone I'm recommending Mad Men. There were 2 fantastic seasons that I loved because it got into characters and a lot of this stuff. It kind of then went to soft porn for the next few seasons. I've stopped watching it, so I just want to disown it a little bit. But the first couple of seasons were excellent. And they really got into how the guys on Madison Avenue convinced people to buy things. And really what you see early on, though, there really weren't any stats. I mean, they were kind of typed out reports, and you were maybe inching a little bit toward percentages, but it was, we're going to get the most creative people who can figure this out. And you go through, that happened in politics, it happened in marketing, it happened in sports. The scouts got it. Some of the things you saw trying to be debunked during Moneyball, conventional wisdom was king. There really wasn't any place if you were 25 or 30 or 35 for you to have input into decisions because, of course, it was all based on how many years you'd been observing to make your judgment call. So, you were going to walk into any company or any setting, graduate from here, And after 25, 30 years, you'd start to be taken seriously and stop just carrying other people's stuff around. Well, this should be exciting when you're younger, what statistics have done, because if you're smart enough to figure something out and see trends in numbers, you can become a star when you're 23 or 28 or whatever. If you're right, you're right. And there's a fascinating discussion here with the characters. They're sitting around talking about the Nixon-Kennedy race in one of these issues, one of these early episodes. And the older guys are saying, well, obviously Nixon's going to win. We'll run a bunch of commercials. They didn't have the same kind of campaign laws then. It was, you know, we'll run a bunch of TV so our guy can be president. And can you believe this punk kid's running, basically, in so many words, against him? I mean, you got a guy who's had his finger near the nuclear button and had to make all the tough decisions. And then after they go on for a little while, a couple of the younger kids who are, you know, making, I think, a couple $100 a month at the time, they said, well, you know, I actually think Kennedy has something. And the comments they get back are hilarious, but apparently pretty accurate to the room. There are comments like, if the children want to leave the room so we can keep talking about the next president, they're welcome to do so. You know, there just wasn't a lot there. And this was the feeling, Madison Avenue and all. Well, of course, there's certain things that make a president, and that's their stature, how long they've been around. How, you know, it was all there. It was all simple. So obviously, this didn't pan out. As we all know now, JFK won the race. Close race, but he won it. And this made people in politics rethink how they evaluated. It made the people who were good at crunching numbers start to emerge. And a guy named Mike Swinehart, a few years after Madison Avenue had it wrong on a presidential, was sent down to the South to kind of figure out how to make it more Republican. He really had a couple of breakthroughs that both parties picked up on pretty quickly. First of all, he said, we need to actually identify who people are for. I don't mean a poll of 300 people. I mean, I want to figure out who everyone on every block is for in this election. And what he did, and you know, I'll date myself, there was a time we didn't have cell phones. I remember getting my first one. Sounds foreign. There was a time when a long-distance call was so expensive, you'd really screwed up if you came here from outside Milwaukee and called your best friend in New Mexico and had a $90 phone bill on Thanksgiving, which I did. And I mean, I was in trouble with my parents. I mean, long-distance calls were expensive, and there were only 8 people here on campus. I don't know how Thanksgiving is now, but Virginia was too far away. So you had some inhibitions on reaching people. You couldn't sit in a call center like you could 20 years later and just call everyone. Now, those are a lot of long-distance calls. Mike actually sent out teams of young workers with rolls of nickels, because that's what a payphone call cost then. They would go to a town, they would open the phone book, they would start putting nickels in and calling one person after another, and back then, no one screened their phone calls. If you got a call in 1968, you were excited because it was probably a friend, and this was a surprise when someone else called. There was no caller ID either. You were picking up the phone. And basically, everyone would answer and say, yeah, I'm for this guy or I'm for that guy, and they were in the phone book. Undecided, favorable, against. The 3 letters any of you will know if you ever get involved in a political campaign. F-A-U, you're going to be one of those 3. And basically went through the phone books marketing people. It really was the first kind of targeted effort. There were a lot of phone books around the country and payphones that had lots of pages missing, because these kids were literally taking the one in the phone booth, tearing out the pages, and walking back with who someone was with. Second thing Mike did when computers came out, pretty ingenious. You know, we used to have actual cards that stored the information, you know, with punch holes in them. He had these guys then go out and go door to door, and as they left the door, pull out literally a shoebox that had a card for each person and punch the hole, F, A, U, whatever they were. And we had our first targeted political mailings. They fed them through the computer. Computers couldn't do much then, but they could say, everyone with this hole gets this letter, which tries to persuade them. Everyone with this hole gets this letter. If they're against, you don't mail them. That's kind of the first breakthrough in targeting. You don't mail the other side, because then they remember there's an election, they come vote against you. So to put this on a grid and see how the targeting was starting, Mike's grid was pretty simple. We're going to show a modern one, more recent one. But basically, what we've worked to now in politics is everyone in the country has a number. 2 million voters, they all have a number. Well, 2 numbers, I'm sorry. There's how likely are they to support your candidate across the bottom, 0% to 100%. So for Swinehart, the 100%ers were Republicans, 0 were Democrat. Obviously, just flip it if you're a Democrat operative running it. Second one, though, equally as important.